All right, next up we have Aaron Hughes and Chris Grundeman presenting the future of North American Regional BCOP.
Okay, good afternoon. For those who don't know me, my name is Aaron Hughes. I'm the president and CEO of 6Connect, and one of the projects that I contribute time to is the best current operational practices, both regionally and globally. Normally, we do a best current operational practices track at NANOG, but enough is evolving with the track and efforts for coordination globally. We figured we'd submit a request for presentation in general session. So first, how many first-timers are still in the room? Okay, and I'll give a brief history of what BCOP is. So the idea behind best current operational practices is that there is one or multiple searchable repositories for best current operational practices. That is, how do I subnet a V6 subnet? Or what is the best standard for knobs that I turn on an interface facing an internet exchange? Things that you would normally go out and search for to find what is the best solution that is considered vetted and accurate and a good operational practice to do, period. So we identified this problem some time ago to say, most people will find a qualified search engine or ask a colleague or go to your local operational forum and search through archive presentations. But the challenge, of course, with those is that they're not really vetted and certainly not current, right? If you pull up an old presentation, it's really hard to tell if a practice has changed or evolved since then. So the idea behind these repositories is not only to have best current operational practices documented, but to regularly check up on them to say, is this still a valid method for doing this, still the current and best way to do it, and get groups of subject matter experts to regularly review and discuss and update these documents. Historically, this has lived at, in this region has lived at bcop.nanog.org, but we've migrated this off to a separate site due to the board suggesting that it's not really a standards body and separating some of these things to put them on their own entity. It turns out that effort actually is good timing, as we've really done a lot of work on global coordination and trying to put this into a single place. But for now, we have a regional site called nabcop.org where you can find current ratified best current operational practices, things that are in progress, and a list of things that are to be picked up by subject matter experts and documented. So due to these changes, basically what's happened is that the NANOG board delegated track decisions to the program committee, and they're now taking on more responsibility in evaluating all of the tracks. So normally between NANOGs, what we would do is concentrate heavily on working on the evolution of documents, and at the tracks we present what's happened since the last one, find more subject matter experts, get more feedback, get more vetting, and either move forward towards ratification or push back out to the community for more changes and updates. NABCOP going forward, will continue to meet at NANOGs, whether that's a track or side rooms or pubs afterward is not really important. But we intend to continue to have meetings at operational forums. But going forward, tracks will actually be proposed to the PC at each meeting. We're also certainly evaluating other forums in the region to do outreach for BCOPs, whether that's like Canadian ISP summits or CaribNOG, but other operator forums where we know that there are subject matter experts and there are people certainly looking for information on best current operational practices or how to actually solve various problems that we may not know about. We're currently in search of a regional home for this repository. Right now I've got these hosted off-site, but probably should be at an organization. So we're evaluating various organizations to see what makes sense as a standards body in this region to help host this as an organization. The majority of the work that happens for BCOPs actually takes place on lists and outside discussions, and even places like this where we'll pull someone to the side and ask for help vetting something or ask for help authoring something. And usually these operator forums are just used for updating the community as to what's happened since the last time it's been discussed. So best current operational practices have actually been growing globally. We've seen these pop up in regions all over the world, and they are growing at various rates and have different levels of participation. But it's a really interesting evolution where we're finding that there's certainly interest all over the world, and that's quite fantastic. Because there's so many popping up, and we found that there have been some duplicated efforts in various different places, and we realize that there are several different repositories, we've been working heavily on global coordination for the last several months. While we're doing that and trying to figure out what the best method is for aggregating all of this data and putting this in a global repository that makes sense, work has continued on every single regional BCOP as well. We're seeing regular new submissions. So since the last NANOG, just regionally, we've ratified ratified one BCOP last time, and that was a best current operational practices document on DDoS mitigation and attacks. There's a link on the nabcop.org website if you'd like to read it. But this was worked on for about a year with quite a few subject matter experts and vetting, and is a very well-written document on how you work with DDoS attacks. There are a bunch of things in progress, and I've got some detailed slides on some of these down the list. We've got one on maintenance notification, EBGP configuration, public peering exchange participants, anti-spoofing, which is a document to sort of update where we have come to from BCP 38. That is, it's not just filtering on the edges, it's actually an entire approach to the best practices for anti-spoofing. Some maintenance notifications, and just to give a little detail on some of these, and I'll move forward fairly quickly. This is about establishing conventions for formatting that are standards. This is about preserving existing human-facing content, but also adding back-end formatted information that makes it easy for machines to parse them and yet still easily human readable. The conventions for supporting tooling and automation, the idea here is that it should be general enough and useful for any service and not just network services, and create libraries and example scripts to support implementation. So this has got a draft that's been started. The mandatory fields have been specified, and this has been evolved with coding. The code structure has been determined. This is to extend Python ICalendar library to implement primitives. A new library to extract the common notification workflow, and example scripts that demonstrate the common notification workflow. This project's actually started on GitHub, so there's a Facebook group, a GitHub group, and certainly if you want to reach out to Eric to get involved with this one, it looks like this will be a very useful BCOP when it's all finished up. I tried to get some updates for a few of these and had a hard time reaching out to a few of the authors to get an update prior to this, but there's progress still on EBGP configuration, public peering exchange participants, and anti-spoofing. I know I've seen some list traffic about it, but I couldn't quite get a summary of updates relatively quickly, so I've just listed these as bullets. Okay, so global BCOP activities. We've found that there are BCOP efforts underway in the Aran region, RIPE region, LACNOG, AFRINOG. There are some developing in JP, NZ, and a few more that we've heard about that are going, like PLNOG. So we know that there are more that are being created, and right now they're all sort of happening individually through their own methodologies and not really following a standard. So several of us got together in Prague at IETF 93 and had the first meeting where all of whatever you want to call the people who are leading these various groups, chairs, track heads, people that are just running lists, people just volunteering their time to coordinate efforts. And we decided that it was probably a very useful path to coordinate efforts so we're not stepping on each other's toes or duplicating efforts in regions, and have a single searchable repository. And we had a very useful discussion. You know, we determined that the IETF made sense for a good home. Excuse me, grab water. That the IETF was probably the best home for global coordination. And that as we reviewed the list of documents being worked on throughout the regions, that the majority of things being worked on were considered global practices. Right? So, you know, if we talk about subnetting or standards on exchanges or interfaces on routers or practices that we normally do, the overwhelming majority fall under a global category. You know, a regional example might be, what is the best practice for interacting with my local law enforcement? Clearly, that's not a document that would be considered something that is a global BCOP. But the overwhelming majority are. You know, we had a fairly detailed discussion about what a plan would be to go forward to have some global coordination. Had a meeting with the RFC editors and talked through the options for interacting with the IETF. And the outcome of that was that you know, we got support from the IETF that this makes sense. It didn't have a particular area that was clear based on our conversation, but that we could use the independent submission stream, starting with some low-hanging fruit, to determine where that actually should live. You know, should it be the ops AD? Should it be some other AD? Should we create a new AD? But the way going forward was to start with something that was common, easy to work with, easy to get agreement that they are a global document and submit through the independent submission stream. As we're doing this, we're going to take the time to templatize how to operate a BCOP track or BCOP group in a region. So we know that we've all had some successes and failures, and that some areas, some regions are moving along faster than others. So we thought it would be a good idea to actually templatize this process and document it somewhere in a common place so anybody can pick it up and say, you know, here's what worked in these regions, here's what didn't work in these regions, and don't make the same mistakes wherever you're trying it. So going forward, we did register gbcop.org for a global repository. There's currently nothing on the website, so don't bother going there. We've started some lists to combine all of the regional efforts for both a support list and a discuss list. We've had the discussion about how to find all of the efforts and get everybody on the same page, and are aggregating all of the participant lists into a single list on gbcop. And we are, you know, making some progress working with the RFC editors on how we streamline process. So I think that's going to be a learning experience for all of us, but it was really pleasant to work with the editors and hear how open they were to working with us and coming up with that process. So what you can do if you're interested in BCOPs is certainly get involved. Right now that lives at nabcop.org. There's an appeals section, which is certainly like if you just have any questions or think that something should be documented and worked on, we take a look at those about every week or every other week and try and find shepherds and authors to answer those questions. There are some drafts in progress that you can certainly get involved with for either helping document or vetting or even just using within your own organizations. And there's a mailman mailing list at nabcop.org called BCOP-support, which you're certainly more than welcome to get on and participate. And really, that's it. So I'm open for questions, discussions, volunteers, comments. I know I'm between you and lunch. Randy.
Randy Bush, IJDRL, Cryptech, blah, blah, blah. It wouldn't be a discussion of BCOP if I didn't raise the fact that we've been doing this in the RIPE repository since before there was a NANOG.
Yeah, totally agree. And you know, the RIPE community is on the same page here. You know, we're working together. We're not working to duplicate efforts.
I'm in the Asia Pacific and the North American community, not in the RIPE community. I use the RIPE repository. I file documents there.
Yeah.
I mean, this is people looking to create work. It already works. But I'm really interested in the intersection with the IETF because I also play there occasionally, and I'll be watching. I don't know how this fits logically. The IETF has stayed away from this edge, and working with RFC Ed and the Ops Directorate will be interesting. I don't mean that sarcastically.
Yeah,
I think
I hear you.
It could change the IETF, and it could change the way we do operational documents, and that might not be all bad.
Exactly. You know, the hope is exactly that we get to actually close this loop and have real operators have feedback into the IETF. And, you know, the long-term lovely outcome would be that we actually have that as a full loop.
Hi, Kathy Aronson. Just to comment on what Randy was saying, there are a couple ways that we've talked about to go within the IETF. One would be like a ops working group that doesn't necessarily meet at an IETF is one way to go, but another way to go is some independent submissions and then eventually having a separate document stream like the IRTF has that would just be for these kind of documents. So it sort of depends on how it evolves, but there are a lot of options that are potential.
I think how these documents are reviewed will be critical, because if you get 5,000 IETF weenies each wanting to add value, you'll go crazy.
Well, right. That's true. And the independent submissions are just reviewed to see whether they conflict with existing IETF work, and since there's not much operationally going on at the IETF, it's probably okay. But if we had an ops working group, the scrutiny of the documents by people who aren't in this community would be quite a bit more. So.
Yep. Back microphone.
Sure. Phil Roberts, Internet Society. One thing I didn't hear you mention, when I hear regional, I don't anticipate a lot of actual operational practice differences, but maybe language differences, right? Have you had any kind of input about getting these things documented in languages other than English?
Yeah, so that's one of the items that we discussed actually at great length was how do we actually make best current operational practices documented for global availability. We certainly talked with some folks who were happy to help with translation, and you know, Heather Flanagan specifically was talking about implementing a new, richer format at the IETF to allow for this kind of standard and this kind of translation going forward. So those are certainly considerations and of great concern, right? There are, for example, some fantastic operational documents written in Japanese that we're also looking to translate to English. But it's definitely a consideration point. I know people are working on trying to make that easy to translate, and I think you'll see progress on that very shortly. Mr. Temkin.
Mr. Hughes. Dave Temkin, Netflix. So I'm heartened to see the progress that you've made here. I think that I personally am in agreement with the direction. One of the biggest things that concerned me in the past with this was the idea that it's a regional effort. That makes a ton of sense. However, it's a global internet, and at the end of the day, the reason why the internet works is because it is a global network. And so obviously having standards or BCOPs in conflict between regions just doesn't work. And so to that point, obviously, this is, you're not directly a standards org, you're not an enforcement org, but how do we, and this is more of a meta question, because we've got 3 minutes to fill till lunch, how do we get teeth on any of these? How do we make sure that, again, if these are for the good and the stability of the internet, that people actually abide by them? How many times have we heard BCP 38, and every other, for the good of the internet standard, that yet, the bad actors don't use, the good actors do. At the end of the day, it's the bad actors that screw everything up.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agreed. And in particular with the BCP 38 example, I had a long discussion with Medicaid about this, and the idea was that, hopefully these have real, useful, simple to follow how-to guidelines as well. And, for whatever it may sound like, an RFC is sometimes hard to read for people who are looking at an operational practice document. And hopefully we can make these in clean, simple language that people can follow, and and the hope, of course, is that they actually execute. Enforcement is a really funny word, and I think that's always a collaborative community thing. We can say, as a community, this is the way we accept routing objects. These are the requirements for joining an exchange, or you're going to be in quarantine until you follow them. And here's a document you can read to follow those, rather than having to get them from every single exchange. And I think the more we start to use them in that method, we'll see that enforcement comes from the community naturally.
Yeah, and just to close out that thought, really, that's what I would like to see, is more outreach from that aspect, which is that getting people to buy off on, if you could get a network the size of level 3 to buy off on, you need to follow this BCOP in order to turn up a BGP session with us, that would be phenomenal.
Yep.
Gonna let me talk this time?
Continue on, close the mics. It's time now for the NANOG 65 lightning talks. Thanks, Aaron.
Yep. No worries.
Excuse me,
Thank
hang on for a second. I want to make it very clear that lunch is not next. The lightning talks are next.
Yep.
Mike Sinatra, by the way, yes, Nat.
My
Lightning
apologies.
talks are next. Lunch is not next. And I think we have time. I think we can take the next 2 questions.
Okay.
Okay, Brandon.
Brandon Ross, Network Utility Force. So I wanted to register my disagreement, actually, with Dave. We work with a large number of very small providers, many of them very rural in North America, especially in the U.S. And while I definitely understand the dichotomy between international and global standards and not, the bottom line is, if we want small service providers to follow BCOPs, which is often where a lot of the problems are, they're just not going to listen to a document that says RIPE on it. They're just not. They don't identify with that. If you say, hey, this was created here in North America, it makes a big difference. And I understand that that's not logical and it should not be that way, but it simply is that way. And I work with a large number of these guys, and they're not going to listen to a document that comes from outside the U.S. And it's sad that that's true, but I think having multiple sources of those kind of documents makes it more likely that we'll be able to get more service providers to follow.
Randy Bush, IJ. First of all, half the things they do came from RIPE documents. You want BCP 38, maybe you're going to use the IRR. Look for RIPE document 81. But what I care about, Aaron, is we're making structures of where to publish and who to publish and whether to enforce and what form. Write a dozen good documents. Physics will see that they find homes.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what's
The
happened.
quality of the protein is what matters, not all the lettuce, tomato, and wrappings.
Wholeheartedly agree, and I think that's exactly what's happened. Is now we have a couple dozen documents spread across 6 or 7 different operator forums, and this idea is to aggregate them. And if people review them and decide that it's garbage, then I'm sure it'll get shut down and the effort will end. And if people review them and start actually utilizing them and find that it's actually useful, it will grow. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron.